The story of how the Galactic Council discovered the truth behind human diplomatic guards began quietly, with nothing dramatic in sight. It started with a small curiosity, a tiny detail that most species would have ignored. But the humans were different, and that difference did not go unnoticed for long. Every species that visited the council hall came with their own style. Some arrived with armored escorts covered in glowing shields. Others walked in with energy staffs or protective drones floating beside them. A few species even brought giant creatures as bodyguards, towering over everyone with sharp horns or thick scales. Protection was taken very seriously in the council. Everyone believed that if an incident were ever to happen inside the chamber, the guards would be the first to respond. Then there were the humans. Whenever they entered the chamber, their guards walked in quietly, wearing simple uniforms with no armor, no shields, and most shocking of all, no weapons. Not even a tiny device, blade, or tool. Their hands were always empty. They stood straight, calm, and focused, but there was nothing dangerous about them. At least, nothing visible at first. Only a few species noticed. The humans were still new to the council compared to the ancient civilizations that had been present for centuries. Their planet was small, their influence new, and their history unfamiliar to most. But slowly, the rumor began to spread. Humans were entering high-level meetings completely unarmed. Some laughed when they heard this. They assumed humans were simply naive, unaware of the dangers that could appear even during peaceful discussions. Others whispered that humans must have a hidden weapon system, something far more powerful than anything the council had seen. Why else would their guards appear so relaxed? Why come unprotected unless they had some secret power? A few species found it insulting. They felt as if the humans were mocking the importance of the council's rules. For generations, meetings had been tense, sometimes even hostile. Bringing armed guards was not just tradition, it was a necessity. It showed readiness, strength, and seriousness. The humans, in contrast, arrived as if they believed nothing bad would ever happen. For months, quiet discussions happened behind closed doors. Some delegates debated whether humans were secretly threatening the council by pretending to be harmless. Others argued that the humans simply did not understand how things worked here. A couple of delegates even suggested that the humans might be hiding weapons inside their bodies or uniforms. Those rumors traveled fast and landed in almost every corner of the council. And yet, despite the curiosity, no one dared to ask the humans directly, not at first. Humans were known for being unpredictable. Many species had read old reports about their early history, filled with stories of wars, conflicts, and resilience. A species with such a past could not be taken lightly. Even unarmed, perhaps they were more dangerous than they appeared. The curiosity grew stronger when a small incident occurred inside the council hall. It was not serious, and no one was harmed, but it was enough to catch everyone's attention. During a routine discussion, a delegate from a warrior species grew frustrated. His voice rose, his posture stiffened, and his guards standing behind him shifted forward, hands on their weapons. In such moments, tensions usually rose quickly. Other guards would prepare themselves too, ready to defend their delegates. But the human guards did nothing. While every other security team responded with intensity, the human guards simply stood still, their eyes calm, their breathing slow. They did not move, did not reach for anything, did not react with fear or aggression. Their stillness was so noticeable that even the arguing delegate paused. Chaos was expected, but the humans didn't give it space to grow. Later, many species replayed the recording from that day. It was the moment that made them realize the humans were not just unarmed, they were different. Their behavior seemed purposeful, controlled, and unshaken, as if they had trained for this exact kind of tension. This made everyone more curious, even suspicious. Finally, after long discussions and private concerns, the council decided it could not continue without an answer. Too many misunderstandings could lead to accidents, and accidents between species could lead to conflict. So the council sent a formal request to the humans, asking them to explain their unusual diplomatic protocol. The humans accepted politely. Without hesitation, the official meeting to discuss the matter took place in one of the council's smaller halls. Representatives from dozens of species attended, filling the curved seats that surrounded the center platform. In the middle stood a panel of human diplomats, accompanied by their quiet, unarmed guards. The council's spokesperson began the meeting by thanking the humans for their cooperation. Then he asked directly why human diplomatic guards never brought weapons into the council hall. The moment the question was asked, a soft silence spread across the room. It was the kind of silence filled with expectation, curiosity, and a little fear. Everyone leaned forward, some with interest, some with caution. The humans exchanged glances, not in panic, but in understanding. One of the human officials stepped forward and began to speak in a steady, warm tone. He said that the answer was simple, but it might sound unusual to others. He explained that humans had learned a painful lesson from their own past. For centuries, humanity had relied heavily on weapons, especially in moments when people feared for their safety. But over time, humans learned that carrying weapons into important discussions created more danger, not less. He said that weapons did not calm situations. They heated them up. They made people feel threatened. They made arguments turn into confrontations. And they made fear spread faster than truth. The council listened carefully, but the explanation still sounded incomplete to many. Some species whispered that the humans must be hiding something. Others thought the humans were simply trying to appear noble or peaceful for political advantage. The spokesperson then asked the humans again, this time more firmly, if there were any hidden devices involved, something invisible or advanced, that the council had not detected. The question was reasonable. Many species possessed technology that could hide weapons behind shields or inside implants. If humans used such tools, it could be dangerous for everyone. But the humans shook their heads. They explained that they carried nothing hidden, nothing invisible. What the council saw was the truth-empty hands and simple uniforms. This only deepened the confusion. Several delegates asked why humans trusted the council hall so much. Did humans somehow believe the council guaranteed perfect safety? Did they think no species would ever act against them? Once again, the humans answered calmly. They said that choosing to come unarmed was not about trust in others. It was about trust in themselves. They believed that if they refused to bring weapons into a peaceful space, it set a tone that others could follow. Weapons changed the energy of a room, even if no one used them. They made people think of danger, betrayal, and protection. Humans wanted the council hall to be a place where ideas were safe, not guarded by fear. Still, the council members were not fully satisfied. They felt the humans were speaking in values, not facts. They needed something more concrete, something they could understand in practical terms. The meeting ended with an agreement that the council would continue the discussion later. But as the humans left the hall, many species whispered to each other about what they had heard. Some thought the humans were simply idealistic. Others thought they were hiding a deeper power. And a few species began to worry, not because humans were unarmed, but because they were so calm about it. It was unusual to see a species that walked into a room full of armed beings without a hint of fear. Over the next few days, more whispers spread around the council. Delegates discussed the topic during meals, while traveling to their quarters, and during private sessions. Questions grew instead of disappearing. Why were humans so confident? Why were they so sure that no harm would come to them? What gave them that certainty? A few council members even joked that maybe humans were so dangerous without weapons that they didn't need any. Perhaps their bodies were stronger, or their minds more capable. No one knew for sure. The council decided that simply listening to human explanations was not enough. They needed proof. They needed to understand how human guards behaved in real moments of danger. And so, the idea of a controlled test began to take shape. But that is the next part of the story. After the first meeting where the humans explained their unusual practice, the Galactic Council could not stop thinking about it. The idea of walking into a room filled with armed delegates without any weapons seemed impossible to most species. Some still laughed quietly, calling it naive or reckless. Others were still suspicious, convinced that humans must have a hidden trick or device. But one thing became clear. The humans themselves were completely calm. Their guards did not show any signs of fear, hesitation, or readiness to strike. Over the following weeks, several council members began to pay closer attention to the human delegates during meetings. They observed small details, tiny gestures that most species would have overlooked. When another delegate spoke harshly or accused someone of wrongdoing, the human guards did not move or stiffen. They simply adjusted their stance, stood straight, and observed quietly. They did not react, they did not whisper orders, and they did not signal for backup. Other species started to notice this too. A few ambassadors whispered among themselves, speculating that the humans must have some form of advanced mental ability, perhaps telepathy or a calming aura that neutralized aggression. Some thought the humans were so skilled in combat that their stillness alone could stop violence. The truth, however, was something entirely different, something far more human. One particular incident brought the situation into sharp focus. It was a routine council session where discussions about trade agreements were underway. The room was filled with tension because one species had accused another of breaking a trade pact. Voices grew louder and gestures became more dramatic. Guards from multiple species shifted forward, their weapons ready. But the human delegates and their guards stayed still. They did not draw weapons, they did not raise voices, and they did not retreat. They simply observed. Then something surprising happened. One of the delegates from a warrior species, known for aggressive behavior, suddenly lunged toward a human envoy. It was a small movement, not intended to strike, but enough to provoke alarm. Every other species' guards reacted instantly, drawing weapons, shouting warnings, and stepping forward to stop the aggression. But the human guards did not move. They did not even twitch. Instead, one of the humans calmly raised a hand, made eye contact with the aggressive delegate, and spoke in a clear, steady tone. The effect was immediate. The attacking delegate froze. His anger, which had been rising uncontrollably, seemed to stall. He blinked, lowered his shoulders, and after a few tense seconds, stepped back. The room fell silent. No one expected this to happen. Observers whispered to each other, trying to figure out what had occurred. Was it a trick? A secret device? A hidden weapon? But when they looked again, the human guards' hands were still empty, and their expression was calm, almost ordinary. After the session, council members discussed the incident in private. Some were impressed, some confused, and a few were angry. They demanded to know how humans could control potentially dangerous situations without any weapons. The human delegates, when asked, replied with patience and simplicity. They explained that humans train their guards to stay calm and observant. Their role is not to fight first, but to de-escalate. They study body language, tone of voice, and even cultural cues of other species. When someone becomes aggressive, the first response is always communication, not force. Many species found this hard to believe. Most civilizations the Council knew relied heavily on intimidation and visible strength. guards were expected to respond aggressively to threats. Weapons were considered essential. Yet the humans' approach was completely different. They did not rely on power. They relied on understanding. Their confidence did not come from their weapons, because they had none. It came from their training, their discipline, and their experience in reading people. This unusual approach caused a mix of fascination and frustration among the council. Several delegates admitted privately that they had never considered the idea that a species could maintain security without relying on force. Some argued that the humans were lucky, that the situation had not escalated further. Others began to wonder if perhaps humans had discovered something other species had overlooked. That calmness and control could be as powerful as weapons. Over the next few days, the council quietly began to gather more information. Delegates observed the human guards during informal interactions, meals, and transit between meetings. Every time, the pattern was the same. The humans were alert but never threatening. They were ready but never aggressive. They spoke politely, listened carefully, and always maintained composure, even when others acted unpredictably. The more the council watched, the more intrigued they became. Some species started to discuss a controlled experiment, a simulation that would test the human guard's abilities in a potentially dangerous situation. They wanted to understand the limits of this approach. Could humans remain calm if threatened? By real aggression? Would their methods fail if violence escalated? Or were they truly different in a way no other species could understand? When the humans were informed about the proposed test, they agreed without hesitation. They explained that it was an opportunity to demonstrate what their guards were trained to do. They did not claim it would impress anyone, but they were willing to show how their methods worked in practice. Preparation for the test began. A neutral chamber was selected, designed to replicate a typical council meeting. Security measures were in place, and representatives from multiple species volunteered to participate. The humans, as always, entered without any weapons. Their guards were calm, their expressions neutral, their movements deliberate thought as the simulation began. Other guards approached with typical readiness, ready to respond to aggression. The humans remained in place, observing, listening, and monitoring body language. When a mock attack occurred, Delegate moved aggressively toward the humans. The human guards did not react with force. Instead, they positioned themselves calmly, using their presence and steady posture to control the situation. Even when the simulation involved loud shouts, sudden movements, and mock energy weapons fired in non-lethal modes, the human guards did not escalate. They did not panic. They did not shout, and they did not reach for anything. Their calm, measured approach slowed the aggressors, forced them to reconsider, and de-escalated the situation. By the end of the simulation, the council observed that the humans had successfully controlled potential conflict without a single weapon. This demonstration left the council stunned. Many delegates had expected the human guards to fail, or at least struggle. Instead, they had shown an effectiveness that no one had anticipated. Some species whispered that it was almost unnatural, that no unarmed species could possibly achieve such control. Others quietly admitted that humans might have a secret advantage, one that was not technological or biological, but rooted in training, discipline, and understanding. After the test, the human delegates explained their philosophy further. They said that throughout human history, people had learned that carrying weapons often made situations worse. Threats could escalate into violence quickly, and even a single misstep could end in tragedy. Over time, humans had developed an approach where the first line of defense was observation, communication, and psychological understanding. Weapons were only a last resort, and sometimes not even necessary. The council listened carefully. Slowly, some delegates began to grasp the concept. They realized that humans were not weak. They were strong in a different way. Their strength was patience, awareness, and empathy. Their calmness projected confidence, and that confidence could stop aggression before it started. It was a form of power that did not rely on fear or weapons. Despite the revelations, some species remained skeptical. They worried that this approach would fail in a real crisis, that humans were taking unnecessary risks. Others, however, became quietly fascinated. They saw the potential for a new method of diplomacy, one that did not rely on threats, intimidation, or force. It was a different kind of courage, one that few species had ever considered. By the end of this period of observation, the Council had begun to accept that humans were indeed unique in their approach to diplomatic security. They were no longer seen as naive or reckless. Instead, they were respected for their ability to remain calm, unarmed, and effective. The Council started to consider that perhaps there was wisdom in trusting peace over weapons, and that sometimes vulnerability could be a strength. This realization did not happen overnight. It took weeks of observation, discussion, and careful analysis. But gradually, the Council began to shift its perspective. Humans were no longer just newcomers or curiosities. They were teachers in a way, showing that diplomacy could be protected not by force, but by understanding, patience, and self-control. And as the Council prepared to explore this idea further with more formal testing, one thing became clear. The mystery of human guards was no longer a question of hidden weapons or secret powers. It was a question of philosophy, strategy, and human experience. Humans had learned lessons from their own history that other species had yet to understand, and that knowledge was quietly reshaping how the Council thought about safety, trust, and the power of calm in a chaotic galaxy. After the controlled simulation, the Galactic Council realized that simply watching humans in normal meetings was no longer enough. Questions remained. How far did this calm, unarmed approach really work? Could humans stay collected in every possible scenario, even if things went wrong? To answer these questions, the Council decided to conduct a formal investigation. A team of delegates, security specialists, and cultural analysts was assembled. They were responsible for observing, interviewing, and documenting human practices. Their goal was to understand why human guards could maintain order without weapons and why their methods were effective even in tense situations. It was a task that many species approached with both skepticism and curiosity. The first step of the investigation involved interviews. The team invited human diplomats, security officers, and trainers to speak. They asked about training routines, historical experiences, and rules governing human behavior during diplomatic events. Humans answered every question politely, explaining that their guards were trained for mental resilience, emotional control, and observation skills long before any physical action was considered. The investigators were surprised by how detailed the training programs were. Human guards did not just learn self-defense techniques. They studied human psychology, social interactions, and conflict resolution. They were taught to notice subtle changes in posture, voice tone, and facial expression. A simple shift in someone's stance could indicate frustration, anger, or hesitation, and the guards learned to respond in ways that diffused tension rather than escalate it. Some council members found this fascinating. They were used to relying on weapons, shields, and technological defenses to maintain order. They had never considered that understanding someone's emotions and intentions could be just as powerful. Still, not everyone was convinced. A few species whispered among themselves that humans were hiding something. Perhaps their calmness was a result of some unseen ability, or maybe they had some advanced technology that the Council had failed to detect. To investigate further, the Council requested that human guards participate in live demonstrations beyond the simple simulations already conducted. They wanted to see real-time responses to unpredictable events. Humans agreed again, stating that the best way to understand their approach was through practice, not just explanation. The next series of tests took place in a specially designed chamber. It was similar to the council's main hall, but with controlled scenarios to challenge the guards. Other species participated too, bringing their own armed teams to simulate aggression. Some of the tests included loud arguments, sudden movements toward the humans, and the activation of non-lethal energy weapons. Every scenario was intended to push the human guards to the limits of their training. Observers watched closely. At first, many expected the humans to falter. After all, they had no weapons, no shields, and no obvious defenses. But time and again, the humans maintained their composure. They did not react with force. They did not panic. They did not even flinch when energy blasts passed nearby at safe settings. Instead, they positioned themselves strategically, keeping their delegates between themselves and potential threats, speaking in calm but firm tones and using gestures to encourage cooperation rather than conflict. One moment stood out to the observers more than any other. During a test, an alien delegate simulated a sudden, aggressive lunge toward a human diplomat. Every other guard in the chamber raised weapons or moved to intercept. The human guards, however, did not reach for anything. They stepped slightly to the side, calmly placed themselves in the path of escalation, and spoke in a tone that commanded attention without intimidation. The simulated aggressor froze, then stopped. There was no need for physical force. The humans had controlled the situation entirely through presence and communication. After the demonstrations, the council conducted further interviews. Investigators asked why humans trusted their training so completely. The human officers explained that trust in themselves was crucial. If they doubted their own abilities, the approach would fail. They also stressed the importance of experience. Humans had spent centuries learning that weapons often caused more problems than they solved. Wars and conflicts on Earth, both between nations and within communities, had taught them that the first act of violence often escalated situations irreversibly. Humans had learned to rely on observation, patience, and negotiation before considering force. Council members were still skeptical, so they asked for historical examples. Humans provided accounts from their pastimes when armed intervention, escalated conflicts, and times when calm negotiation had prevented violence. They described incidents in which showing restraint and understanding had saved countless lives. The stories highlighted a pattern. Weapons alone did not create security, but human skill, awareness, and calmness often did. Some delegates began to see a pattern that challenged their assumptions. Most species had always equated safety with visible strength. Weapons, shields, and protective armor were symbols of power and deterrence. The humans demonstrated that safety could also be created through behavior, presence, and understanding. It was a concept that was difficult to grasp, but impossible to ignore. The council also observed that human guards were not passive. Their calmness did not mean inaction. They were actively engaged in monitoring the environment, reading the intentions of others, and anticipating possible conflicts before they occurred. Their method relied on prevention rather than reaction. By noticing signs of tension early and addressing them calmly, they often prevented this situation from ever becoming dangerous. To further test this principle, the council arranged a scenario involving multiple simultaneous threats. Several delegates acted aggressively, some with loud verbal attacks, others with sudden movements, and still others with simulated energy weapons. The human guards, despite being outnumbered and completely unarmed, handled the situation efficiently. They positioned themselves, guided their diplomats calmly to safe locations, and communicated with aggressors in a way that diffused hostility. By the end of the exercise, even the most skeptical observers had to acknowledge the effectiveness of the human approach. No weapons had been used. Yet the simulated threats had been controlled completely. The council began to realize that humans had developed a security philosophy that was entirely different from anything they had seen before. After this demonstration, the human officers explained the reasoning behind their methods. They said that human history had taught them a simple but powerful truth. Aggression often escalates when met with aggression. Weapons could intimidate, but they could also provoke. The presence of arms made conflict more likely, not less. Human guards learned to use their understanding of psychology, patience, and careful observation to prevent conflict from arising in the first place. The council listened carefully. Slowly, some delegates began to rethink their own assumptions. They began to understand that humans' calm, unarmed approach was not recklessness or ignorance. It was deliberate, disciplined, and based on centuries of learning from experience. Humans had discovered a way to maintain safety without threatening others, concept that was both foreign and revolutionary to the council. Despite this understanding, some delegates remained hesitant. They worried that such methods might fail in real crises, that humans were taking unnecessary risks, or that their confidence would be tested beyond what training could prepare them for. The humans acknowledged this possibility, but emphasized that risk was part of diplomacy. The choice to remain unarmed was a conscious one, made to protect the integrity of discussions and to model trust and restraint. By the conclusion of the formal investigation, the council had collected a wealth of information. They had seen demonstrations, conducted interviews, and reviewed historical examples. The evidence was clear. Humans did not carry weapons for a reason, and that reason was grounded in discipline, experience, and a philosophy of non-escalation. The mystery that had initially puzzled the council was slowly unraveling. Yet even with this knowledge, the humans' approach continued to challenge the council's understanding of security. Most species had never encountered a civilization willing to accept vulnerability as a strategy. Humans were showing that restraint, calmness, and awareness could be more effective than force or intimidation. The idea was not just unusual, it was transformative. As the council concluded Part 3 of its investigation, they agreed that further observation and testing would be necessary. Humans were not only demonstrating an effective method of protection, but they were also teaching an entirely new approach to diplomacy. The implications extended beyond one meeting hall or one species. It had the potential to change how the entire council viewed security, trust, and conflict resolution. The first stage of understanding was complete, but questions remained. How would humans handle extreme hostility? Could their approach work against a species completely unfamiliar with diplomacy? What limits existed, if any, to the calm, unarmed method? These questions set the stage for the next phase of observation, a phase that would challenge the human guards even further and reveal the full depth of their unique abilities. Through it all, one lesson was becoming clear. Human guards were not just unarmed, they were trained. After weeks of interviews, observations, and controlled demonstrations, the Galactic Council had learned a lot about the humans. Yet curiosity remained. Observers had seen calm, unarmed humans handle tension, but they had not yet seen how they would respond to truly unpredictable and aggressive situations. To answer that, the Council decided to stage a high-stakes simulation. This test would push human guards to their limits and show whether their unusual methods could work in extreme scenarios. The chamber selected for the simulation was larger than any normal council hall. It had multiple entrances, hidden observation, platforms, and a variety of obstacles to make movement more challenging. Observers from every major species attended, some openly skeptical and others curious. Several species contributed their own armed teams to act as aggressors. The simulation was designed to test human guards under pressure, with multiple simultaneous threats and sudden shifts in intensity. The humans arrived as always, walking calmly into the hall with their delegates. Their uniforms were simple, their expressions composed, and their hands empty. Many of the other species whispered among themselves. "How can they possibly control this?" asked one delegate. Another muttered, "They must have some hidden advantage. No one can be this calm without a weapon." But the humans showed no sign of concern. They positioned themselves near their delegates, observed the layout, and waited for the simulation to begin. The first scenario started quietly. A delegate from a warrior species moved aggressively toward a human diplomat, shouting accusations. Other aggressor delegates drew non-lethal weapons and simulated an attack. The human guards, as expected, did not move to fight. Instead, they subtly shifted positions, creating a buffer between the aggressors and their delegates. They raised their voices in calm, firm tones, addressing the aggressors without anger or fear. Observers noticed immediately that the humans' presence alone seemed to influence the aggressors' behavior. Even those acting violently hesitated, as if unsure how to respond to calmness in the face of aggression. As the scenarios grew more complex, multiple aggressors approached at once. Loud arguments broke out simultaneously in different corners of the chamber. Some aggressors threw objects, while others moved in patterns designed to test human reflexes. Still, the human guards remained steady. They coordinated with each other silently, using subtle gestures and eye contact to communicate. Without speaking loudly or raising their hands in threat, they managed to keep all delegates safe while slowing down potential escalation. At one point, one of the aggressors intentionally ignored verbal warnings and lunged toward a human diplomat. Observers expected chaos. Weapons were drawn, and tension reached its peak. But instead of reacting with aggression, the human guard stepped into the path calmly, maintaining eye contact with the aggressor. A few words were spoken, calm and authoritative, and the aggressor froze. The effect was immediate. Other aggressors paused, some hesitated, and the chamber's energy shifted from chaos to controlled tension. Observers were astonished. Many whispered that it was impossible. They had never seen such a situation handled so efficiently without weapons. The humans' method relied not on intimidation, but on the confidence and presence of the guards themselves. Their calmness was a form of control. The council realized that humans had developed a unique psychological strategy, using understanding, patience, and observation to prevent conflict before it could erupt. The simulation continued with increasing difficulty. Aggressors created distractions, tried coordinated movements, and even faked attacks from different directions at the same time. Human guards moved minimally, almost imperceptibly, adjusting their positions to protect delegates while avoiding confrontation. Their focus was remarkable. Each guard seemed to anticipate potential threats before they happened. Communication between the guards was subtle but precise, allowing them to cover multiple angles without drawing attention to themselves. During a particularly intense moment, one of the aggressors tried to corner a human diplomat against a wall. The human guard moved forward slowly, creating a presence that projected authority without threatening violence. Then, with calm words and measured gestures, the guard directed the aggressor away from the diplomat. Observers noticed that the aggressor's aggressive stance softened immediately, and the situation de-escalated within seconds. No weapons were used. No one was harmed. Yet the result was complete control. After this scenario, the council conducted a brief analysis. Delegates and observers discussed what they had seen. Many admitted that humans were effective because they relied on discipline, awareness, and presence. They controlled situations not by force, but by understanding the intentions and psychology of those around them. Weapons were unnecessary because the human guards were prepared to respond to aggression in a non-violent way. Even so, some species were still skeptical. "This is a simulation," one delegate argued. Real threats may not respond the same way. What if someone attacks without warning? Humans agreed that risks existed, but they explained that their training focused on preparation and anticipation. They study potential behaviors, recognize early signs of aggression, and develop strategies to calm situations before violence occurs. They do not rely on chance or luck. Their method is deliberate and calculated. Another aspect observers noticed was how human guards influenced not just aggressors, but bystanders. Other delegates, who initially looked nervous at the chaotic simulation, seemed calmer when human guards were present. Their confidence grew simply by watching the humans maintain composure. It became clear that the guards' calmness had a ripple effect, spreading to others and reducing overall tension. The humans' approach was also flexible. They did not rely on rigid rules or brute force. Instead, they adapted to each situation, analyzing the behavior of aggressors and responding in ways that would diffuse potential danger. Their method was proactive rather than reactive. By noticing subtle cues, like a change in tone, a shift in posture, or a glance, they could act before aggression became physical. By the end of the high-stakes simulation, even the most doubtful council members had to admit that humans were extraordinarily effective. They had faced unpredictable, coordinated aggression, yet remained calm, coordinated, and fully in control. No weapons were used. No harm occurred. The humans had demonstrated that security could be maintained without intimidation, technology, or violence. After the simulation, human diplomats explained the philosophy behind their actions. They said that humans had learned from their history that violence often escalated when met with force. Weapons and intimidation could create fear, but they rarely solved problems. True security came from understanding, communication, and patience. By remaining calm and unarmed, human guards signaled that the purpose of the meeting was not conflict, but collaboration. This approach prevented escalation before it could happen. Council members listened carefully. Slowly, they began to grasp a concept that was completely new to them. Humans were not relying on hidden technology, superhuman strength, or luck. Their power came from discipline, training, and understanding. Calmness itself became a tool, and presence became a form of protection. For the first time, the council considered that restraint could be more powerful than force. Despite the overwhelming success, humans emphasized that their method required constant practice, attention, and preparation. It was not simple or easy. Guards trained for years to develop observation skills, emotional control, and situational awareness. Their effectiveness depended on their ability to remain calm under pressure and anticipate potential threats before they escalated. Observers left the chamber with a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and curiosity. The humans had shown that safety did not always require weapons, that discipline, awareness, and empathy could control potentially dangerous situations. The council realized that they had witnessed something truly unusual, an approach to security that was both simple and profoundly effective. As the humans departed from the simulation chamber, several species followed them quietly, asking questions and trying to understand the methods in detail. They wanted to know how humans trained, how they prepared for different scenarios, and how they could achieve the same calm confidence. Humans shared insights patiently, explaining that their philosophy was grounded in experience and a deep understanding of human and alien behavior. Alike. By the end of Part 4, it was clear that the human guards had not only passed the high-stakes simulation, but had exceeded expectations. The council began to reconsider assumptions about safety, diplomacy, and control. Humans had demonstrated that vulnerability, when paired with skill and understanding, could be a form of strength. Calmness and restraint, previously underestimated by most species, were revealed as tools that could prevent conflict more effectively. then forced out the lessons from the simulation were profound. Observers realized that humans' approach was not just a curiosity, it was a strategy. By remaining unarmed, calm, and observant, human guards could influence both aggressors and bystanders, preventing escalation and maintaining order. They had shown that preparation, awareness, and discipline could create a security system more effective than any weapon. The stage was now set for the Chi Council to learn the full reasoning behind. After the high-stakes simulation, the Galactic Council had seen enough to be impressed, but the deeper question still remained. Why did humans choose to send unarmed guards in the first place? What history, experience, or philosophy made them confident enough to face danger without weapons? To answer this, the Council invited human diplomats and their security officers to a special session designed to explain the reasoning behind their unique approach. The meeting room was quiet but crowded. Observers from nearly every species filled the seats, eager to understand the mystery that had puzzled them for months. Humans arrived as usual, calm and composed, their guards unarmed and attentive. There was no sense of fear, no hesitation, no visible sign that they felt vulnerable. For most species, this alone was remarkable. The lead human officer began to speak. He explained that their methods were shaped by centuries of human history, experiences that had taught humanity both the dangers of weapons and the value of restraint. Long ago, humans had relied heavily on weapons to solve problems, both within their own communities and between nations. Wars, conflicts, and endless cycles of retaliation had shown that weapons often cause more harm than good. They escalated tensions, provoked fear, and frequently led to unintended consequences. Humans had learned that in negotiations, conflict, or tense situations, bringing weapons into a space changed the entire dynamic. People became defensive, suspicious, and ready to strike at the slightest provocation. Arguments escalated into violence, and disputes that could have been resolved peacefully often ended in tragedy. Over time, humans realized that their survival and security did not always come from force, but from understanding, observation, and patience. The human officer continued, describing how this philosophy had been translated into training for diplomatic guards. They were not just taught to stand still or remain calm. They were trained to read people, detect subtle signs of tension, and intervene before situations escalated. Their training focused on anticipating behavior, understanding intentions, and using presence and communication to prevent aggression. Calmness itself was a tool. Awareness was a shield. Communication was a weapon more effective than any blade. The council listened intently, some delegates nodding thoughtfully, others whispering to each other in disbelief. Many had assumed that safety required visible strength or technology, yet the humans were showing that understanding and composure could achieve the same, and often better, results. One of the human diplomats explained further that their approach was rooted in trust, not naive trust in others, but trust in themselves and in the principles of diplomacy. They did not expect every being to act peacefully, but they believed that projecting calm and discipline could influence behavior. By remaining unarmed, they signaled that their purpose was dialogue, not confrontation. They communicated that threats were not necessary and that cooperation could lead to better outcomes than fear. Several species in the council whispered among themselves. Some were still skeptical, believing that humans were lucky or had some hidden advantage. Others began to realize that this approach required far more skill and courage than simply carrying a weapon. To face potential danger without relying on force demanded self-discipline, careful judgment, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. The humans continued, sharing examples from their history. They described times when restraint had prevented wars and conflicts that might otherwise have escalated uncontrollably. Leaders, negotiators, and guards had learned that showing weapons or aggression often provoked retaliation, while calm negotiation and understanding often resolved issues before they became dangerous. Each story reinforced the principle: weapons were not always the solution. Sometimes restraint was stronger. Observers began to see a pattern. The human guard's calm presence was not passivity. It was deliberate, purposeful, and carefully trained. They were ready to act if necessary, but their first response was always observation and de-escalation. Their role was to protect diplomacy itself, not to intimidate or threaten. This required a different kind of courage, a willingness to face uncertainty without relying on force. One of the council's oldest delegates asked a question that had been on everyone's mind. What if this approach fails? What if an aggressor ignores your calmness and attacks anyway? The human officer responded honestly. There were risks, he said, as in any security situation. But the risk of relying on weapons alone, history had shown, was often greater. Escalation could lead to injury, death, or broader conflict. By training guards to anticipate, observe, and communicate, humans reduced the likelihood of escalation and kept their delegates safe in a way that weapons could not. He went on to explain that human guards were not chosen randomly. Every officer was carefully selected for temperament, emotional control, and situational awareness. Training involved years of practice in simulated and real-life scenarios, learning to respond calmly under pressure. They practiced reading micro-expressions, tone changes, and posture, developing an almost instinctive ability to predict behavior before it became threatening. It was not luck, it was preparation, skill, and discipline. The council began to grasp that the human approach required constant attention and effort. It was not simple bravery. It was skill built over generations, refined through experience, and grounded in understanding human and alien behavior. Unlike most species, which relied on weapons as a first response, humans had developed a philosophy that emphasized prevention, communication, and presence. Another human diplomat explained the broader philosophy behind their methods. Humans believed that peace and security were more than the absence of weapons. True safety was created when all parties in a room felt respected, heard, and understood. By remaining unarmed, human guards created an environment where dialogue could flourish and tensions could be managed before they became dangerous. Their method was not passive. It was an active engagement of presence, perception, and patience. Some species in the council began to whisper to each other with amazement. They realized that human security methods could teach them something valuable, not just about guarding delegates, but about managing conflict, building trust, and negotiating difficult situations. The humans' approach challenged long-held assumptions about power, protection, and control. The human officers emphasized that their methods were not infallible. They admitted that extreme aggression or unpredictable behavior could still pose challenges. But even in those cases, their training allowed them to respond thoughtfully, using observation, presence, and communication to regain control. Weapons might sometimes seem like an immediate solution, but humans had learned that discipline, preparation, and restraint often achieved safer outcomes. The council also noted that humans did not separate emotion from security. They trained to understand and manage it. Anger, fear, and aggression were natural, even in diplomacy. Human guards learned to recognize these emotions, respond appropriately, and prevent them from escalating. It was a skill that went beyond physical defense. It was a mastery of psychological and social dynamics. One of the observers asked whether this philosophy could be applied beyond human delegates. Could it work with other species in other contexts? Humans nodded. They explained that while every culture and species had unique behaviors, the principles of calmness, observation, and communication were universal. The exact methods might differ, but the core idea, managing conflict without relying on weapons, could be applied across the galaxy. By the end of the session, the council understood the full reasoning behind the humans' choice. The guards were unarmed, not because humans were naive, weak, or overconfident. They were unarmed because history had taught humanity that weapons often create more danger than they prevent. Humans had chosen a different path, one of discipline, skill, and deliberate calmness. They had created a security system based on awareness, understanding, and presence rather than fear and force. The room was silent for a moment after the explanation. Delegates from multiple species looked at each other, absorbing the implications. Humans had shown that vulnerability could be a strength, that restraint could prevent violence, and that calmness could control situations that weapons often escalated. For many species, this was a revolutionary idea. As the human delegates left the hall, the council quietly discussed the lessons learned. Some admitted that they would need time to fully understand the approach. Others began to see the potential for applying these principles in their own diplomatic protocols. The humans had not only demonstrated skill, they had also shared a philosophy that could reshape how species across the galaxy approach diplomacy and security. By the end of Part 5, it was clear that the mystery had been solved. Humans did not carry weapons because their history and experience had taught them a better way. Their approach relied on discipline, observation, and communication. It required skill, courage, and trust. Most importantly, it emphasized that safety and diplomacy could be protected without escalating conflict, a lesson that the Galactic Council would never forget. After months of observation, simulations, and explanations, the Galactic Council had finally come to a profound realization. Humans were unlike any species they had encountered, not because they had secret weapons or extraordinary powers, but because of their philosophy, training, and the courage to act differently. The Council began to understand that humans had transformed the concept of security. It was no longer about weapons, intimidation, or force. It was about discipline, awareness, and calm. The Council decided to hold a final assembly to discuss the implications of what they had learned. Delegates filled the chamber, each eager to share their perspective. There was a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and cautious optimism in the air. Many species had initially doubted humans, but after witnessing the demonstrations, simulations, and explanations, skepticism had turned into respect. Some delegates even admitted that they had been wrong to underestimate humans. The humans entered the chamber as they always did, calm, composed, and unarmed. Their guards walked steadily beside them, alert but relaxed, projecting confidence, without aggression. The contrast between them and other species' heavily armed teams was stark. Observers could not help but notice the subtle authority the humans exuded, not through force, but through presence. A senior member of the council began the session by addressing the delegates. "We have spent months observing, questioning, and analyzing the methods of the human species," the speaker said. "What we have learned challenges our understanding of security, diplomacy, and control. Humans have shown us that strength does not always come from weapons. Calm, awareness, and understanding can be more powerful than any shield or energy cannon." The room murmured in agreement. Delegates from multiple species nodded thoughtfully, some still in disbelief, others clearly impressed. The humans listened, quietly, their expressions neutral but attentive, ready to speak when asked. Finally, a council member asked the humans to explain, in their own words, the essence of their philosophy. The lead human officer rose and spoke with calm authority. "Our approach is simple," he said. "Weapons and intimidation may provide temporary safety, but they often escalate tension. Real security comes from understanding, observation, and calm. By remaining unarmed, we communicate trust and restraint. By being aware of body language, tone, and behavior, we can prevent conflict before it begins. Our goal is to protect diplomacy itself, not to threaten anyone." He paused to let the words sink in. Many species were silent, processing the idea. It was completely different from the methods they had relied on for centuries. Weapons were seen as necessary, aggression as aggression, inevitable, and fear as a tool to control. Humans were showing that restraint, patience, and understanding could achieve more than force ever could. Another human officer added, "Our history taught us that violence often begets more violence. Wars, conflicts, and retaliations have cost countless lives. Over time, we learned that the first response should never be aggression. Observation, communication, and calm presence are our primary tools. Weapons are only a last resort, and even then, they are rarely needed." Delegates whispered among themselves. Some expressed astonishment, others skepticism. A few admitted quietly that they wished their own species had thought this way sooner. One elder delegate from a warrior race spoke up. "It is remarkable," he said. "We have relied on weapons and intimidation for centuries. Yet here you are, unarmed, facing potential threats and controlling situations with nothing but calm and awareness. It is extraordinary." The human officer nodded. "It is not easy," he said. "It takes training, experience, and discipline. Each guard spends years learning to read others, anticipate conflict, and maintain composure. It is not natural for everyone, but it is essential. Discipline and awareness are our true shields." At this moment, the council began to discuss the practical implications of adopting human methods more widely. Some species considered integrating aspects of human training into their own diplomatic protocols. Others debated whether it would work with their unique cultures, temperaments, and histories. But all agreed on one point. Humans had provided a new perspective, one that challenged long-held beliefs about security. The humans also explained that their approach was not passive. Calmness and presence were active tools. They observed, interpreted, and acted when necessary, always seeking to prevent escalation. Aggression was met with understanding first, not force. By addressing tensions early and directly, they could maintain order without resorting to weapons. This required vigilance, intelligence, and courage, and it relied on the human ability to remain composed in the face of uncertainty. Several council members were curious about how humans trained their guards. The humans explained that training included simulation exercises, observation drills, psychological analysis, and practical scenarios. Guards learned to interpret micro-expressions, detect subtle shifts in posture, and respond appropriately to verbal and nonverbal cues. They also practiced communication strategies designed to calm, redirect, and de-escalate aggressive behavior. Every aspect of their training focused on preventing conflict rather than responding to it with force. As the session continued, the implications became clearer. Humans had taught the council a lesson that extended beyond diplomacy and security. They had shown that vulnerability could be a strength, that patience could outweigh aggression, and that understanding could achieve what weapons never could. These were lessons not just in guarding delegates, but in managing relationships, building trust, and fostering cooperation across species. The council decided to take one final step to recognize and honor this approach. They established a formal protocol for studying human methods and adapting them where appropriate. Delegates from other species would undergo observation, training, and consultation with human experts to learn how to incorporate calmness, awareness, and discipline into their own diplomatic practices. The humans, as always, agreed to participate, sharing knowledge without ego or pretense. In the following weeks, the impact of humans' philosophy began to spread. Other species started observing human guards during normal council sessions. taking notes on their posture, tone, and behavior. Some species experimented with similar techniques in small-scale meetings, learning to anticipate tension, communicate calmly, and influence behavior without aggression. The idea was spreading quietly but steadily. Observers noticed a shift in the council itself. Meetings that had once been tense, filled with suspicion and the subtle threat of force, began to feel different. Even species known for their aggressiveness adjusted their behavior when interacting with humans or following similar methods. Calmness and awareness were gradually recognized as tools as powerful as any weapon. During one particular session, a situation arose that would have previously escalated into chaos. Two delegates from rival species argued loudly, their guards reaching for weapons. Yet human guards stepped forward, calmly positioning themselves between the delegates and using subtle communication to redirect focus and reduce tension. Within minutes, the argument de-escalated. No weapons were drawn, no energy shields activated, and the council realized the humans' approach had prevented conflict where traditional methods would have failed. It was a turning point. Observers and delegates began to understand that the human philosophy was not just effective, it was transformative. It had the power to change how species approached diplomacy, security, and conflict resolution across the galaxy. By the end of the final session, the Council formally acknowledged the wisdom of human guards. They recognized that being unarmed was not a weakness, but a conscious choice rooted in history, discipline, and understanding. Humans had demonstrated that vulnerability could be a strength, that calmness could influence behavior more effectively than weapons, and that restraint could prevent violence more reliably than force. The human officers stood quietly, accepting the Council's acknowledgement without arrogance. They knew that their methods were not infallible, but they also understood that the lesson they offered extended far beyond themselves. It was a philosophy, a way of thinking, and a model for peaceful diplomacy in a complex galaxy. As the humans left the chamber for the last time in this series of observations, delegates and observers reflected on what they had learned. Across the Council, species discussed how they might apply these lessons in their own diplomatic interactions. Some remained cautious, skeptical of the practicality, but most were inspired by the possibility that diplomacy could be conducted without relying on threats or weapons. In the months that followed, the influence of human philosophy continued to grow. New protocols emphasized awareness, calm, and communication. Training programs incorporated human-inspired techniques. Conflicts that might once have escalated into violence were handled with restraint and skill. And the reputation of humans as diplomats who carried no weapons became a symbol, a reminder that true strength sometimes comes not from force, but from understanding, patience, and courage. The story of humans and their unarmed guards became a lesson not only for the Galactic Council, but for every species that encountered it. It demonstrated that history, experience, and philosophy could guide action more effectively than technology or brute force. It showed that courage was not always about confer,